You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. We're joined for the first time, I believe, by Benjamin Weinthal. He is a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, based in Germany. He is also the European correspondent for the Jerusalem Post and a contributor to FoxNews.com. We catch up with him in Germany, and let me just say how pleased I am to do so. Benjamin Weinthal, welcome. It's good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on, Frank.
One of the things that you've been writing about that is really very timely to discuss in light of what we just were considering with Marc Lebouy of Canada in the wake of the election there of a new prime minister who seems to be keen to throw the door open to Canadian immigration from some of the places perhaps that people have been migrating to Germany from, notably Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Eritrea, and the like. I want to talk with you a little bit about what this migration, if you will, some call it the Hijra, kind of Muslim colonization, really, is looking like in Germany at the moment.
Well, Germany is slated to accept close to 1 million refugees from majority Muslim countries. The number may exceed 1 million, probably 1.5 million when families are brought over. And the Merkel administration, Chancellor Angela Merkel's government, is severely overwhelmed by the refugee influx. She just traveled to Turkey yesterday to work out an agreement with the Islamic Prime Minister Erdogan to rein in the migration wave in exchange for massive funding and possibly Turkey becoming an EU member. So that shows some desperation. In terms of the migration, many of these refugees, for example, from non-conflict zones like Bosnia or Pakistan or Bangladesh are here or traveled here for economic reasons. Then, of course, are refugees from the conflict zones like Iraq and Syria. And it's a mixed bag. There was a horrible case of an honor killing that took place in late September. I wrote about it for Fox News involving a 20-year-old Syrian woman who was raped in Syria by Assad's soldiers. Her family deemed her to be unclean, and it's believed that her father and brothers stabbed her in late September.
This is so stunning and so horrible. It almost defies imagination. You make the point that there are some among this migration population that is not a problem, but there are also some that are very, very much clearly of a sort of jihadist bent, or at least Sharia adherent bent, and that can only augur ill, it would seem to me, for the host country. Let me ask you about something you just alluded to, though. If Germany were now to agree to Turkey's inclusion in the European Union, wouldn't that make things worse? Because not only would you have all of these refugees, presumably based in Turkey, free to come because they would be inside the EU, but an awful lot of Turks, and Germany has a fair number of them already. But I can't imagine that this wouldn't just exacerbate the problem, would it, Benjamin?
Well, it depends on what type of agreement is negotiated with Turkey. Merkel has certainly reversed her position. She was opposed to Turkey's absorption into the European Union. Now she's put Turkey, according to German media reports I've read over the last few days, on the track to become an EU member. Right now, Germany's offering Turkey billions in euros to keep the refugees within Turkey, which Turkey has, I think, a little over 2 million refugees from Syria and Iraq combined. But there are problems with the refugee influx. For example, the Jewish communities in Austria and Germany are very, very worried about many of the Syrian refugees who have appeared and harbor horribly anti-Semitic views and are vehemently opposed to the state of Israel, and that's because of their socialization in Syria. So there's also concern from minority groups in Austria and Germany about a huge spike in anti-Semitism and possibly jihadi attacks.
And how were these appeals by Angela Merkel received, as best you can tell, by Erdogan in Turkey?
Well, Erdogan, if you look at the photographs of both of them sitting sort of in a royal sultan setting in these gold chairs that made the rounds here in Germany, he's thrilled because her appearance will help boost his election chance. The Turkish elections are set for November 1st. He's taking some hits because of what's happening in his country in terms of unrest. And now that Merkel showed up, she sort of helped mainstream him, which without any criticism.
Let me turn to another topic, if I may. And again, our guest is Benjamin Weinthal with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies based in Germany. He is a research fellow at FDD, also the European correspondent for the Jerusalem Post in Israel. To the extent that we can understand what's going on with this deal with Iran, Benjamin, it's pretty clear that this thing is not going to work out, certainly not as promised by the Obama administration and some of the other Perm 5 members in Europe. It will almost certainly result in a nuclear weapon, but along the trail, it appears the Iranians are going to do all kinds of bad things, including improving the capabilities of jihadists in the region and beyond. You have indicated that notwithstanding all of that, there is essentially no chance that the Europeans, including Germany, will go along with any snapping back of sanctions, as the administration likes to say, or for that matter, any other punishment of Iran. Talk about that and why.
Frank, that's an excellent point, and it's not really on the media radar screen, both in the United States and Europe. And the idea is European trade with Iran prior to the round of tough sanctions in 2012 was over $20 billion a year bilateral trade. It dropped to under 10, and now because of this very flawed nuclear deal, trade will probably go up to $30 billion a year bilateral trade between the EU and Iran. And the idea is that because companies will invest so much money in Iran and governments, and we've seen these delegations going back and forth. Germany sent over 60 captains of industry with their economic minister just a week and a half after the Iran deal was negotiated in July, that there'll be no incentive to invoke the snapback sanction once Iran violates the deal. And I strongly believe that Iran will violate the deal. We've already seen violations on many levels, but the U.S. administration is ignoring them. So that's the overall idea in terms of the economic incentive being so overwhelming that Europe will retreat from invoking a snapback sanction.
Let me ask you, Benjamin Weinthal, one other piece that you've been writing about recently is what's happening in Israel, not least of concern, of course, to your readers in the Jerusalem Post, is what's being done to aid and abet the Intifada 3.0 is one way of describing it, out of places like Germany. Talk quickly about that, if you would.
Well, the main problem in terms of Europe and Israel is many of the NGOs that are funded by Europeans, including the German government, encourage this type of delegitimization of Israel and the indifference to Palestinian terrorism. So Europe is funneling millions of euros into these NGOs, which are stoking tensions. And of course, European leaders have not vehemently condemned Palestinian terrorism. The media reports here are blanketed with stories about violence and an abstract notion of a sort of a bottomless level of violence, a cycle of violence, but you don't have a sense of who's doing what to whom and why.
Moral equivalence, I guess, is the order of the day, as it unfortunately is in the Obama administration. Benjamin, we have to let you go. I'm afraid hard out of time. Let's do this again soon, though. Thank you for the great work you do at the FDD and the Jerusalem Post. Keep it up, and let's talk again soon. Next up, we'll be speaking with Matt McInnes. We'll get more on the Iran deal and much more straight ahead.
Visit us at facebook.com/securefreedom with Frank Gaffney.